Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. When I was 17, my bedroom had a window looking out the backyard. The backyard was fenced in, but on the other side of the fence were some woods and a retention pond. I'd never been scared of this, and I kept the blinds open so that when the sun rose in the morning, the natural light would help wake me up. One night, I was laid up on my phone with my dog laying in the bed next to me. At around 2 a.m., my dog jumped up and started barking at the window. At first, I thought he was just barking at the reflection, and I told him to stop. But I then realized that he was looking at the left side of the window while his reflection was on the right. I couldn't see outside the window because I had left the lamp on my nightstand. All I could see in the window was a reflection of my bedroom. Not wanting to alert whatever might be out there that I was scared, I faked a yawn, set my phone aside, and I turned off the lamp. I then laid down facing the window, and I swear, I saw a set of human eyes looking back at me from the left side of the window. I drink a lot of water at night, so I had an empty bottle on my nightstand. I grabbed it, and I pretended to just realize that it was empty. I turned on the lamp, and I acted like I was going to get water. I went to my parents' room, and my dad told me not to worry. We had these motion-activated floodlights, and they hadn't turned on, so there was no way anything was out there. I was back to my room, and I told myself that I was just seeing things. So I closed the blinds and turned off the lamp, and I got some sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went to take my dog out and decided to check out the pine straw bedding underneath my window. It was visibly disturbed. I did my best to ignore that and remember what my dad said about the floodlights. That worked pretty well. Well, until my dad tested the floodlights later that day and found that the bulbs had burnt out. To this day, I keep my blinds closed and my lamp off when I sleep. I don't want to risk anything being able to see me, and if anything is somehow peeking through my window, I want to know it's there. If there was someone at my window that night, let's not meet. I was living in a flat share on the outskirts of a city, which is known for generally being very safe. A key is needed to enter the main building, but often the door isn't shut properly, and so it doesn't lock. Not really a cause for concern for anyone in the building, as it's a very trusting neighborhood. It's around 2 a.m., and I'm laying in my bed, naked, completely sprawled out, and someone opens my door and enters. I figure that it's one of my flatmates going to the balcony. You have to walk through my room to access it, so it's completely normal that someone might come in at this time. I've just smoked a spliff, and it's 2 a.m., so I opt to ignore him and just pretend to be asleep. I can feel him standing there for about 2 minutes. I think maybe he was waiting for his girlfriend to join him, and maybe he stood there checking his phone. Not a big deal, really. He then goes on to the balcony, takes about 2 or 3 minutes, so I figure that it's definitely him, and he's smoking a cigarette. He then comes back in and goes back to standing in total silence, but I'm half asleep and I don't really think anything of it. But the next morning, my flatmate tells me that someone broke in. Well, sauntered in, I suppose, and then they came into my room, went into the room of my flatmate and rummaged through his things, then went into the kitchen. and upon seeing my flatmate wake up and come to see what was going on, they quickly exited the building. The only thing he stole was my pair of Marshall headphones. We were all very confused as to why they only stole my headphones, as opposed to the money that was left on the table or my flatmate's multiple cameras, for example. We spoke to our neighbors, of which there are around 15 in the building, and none of them had noticed anything out of the ordinary. They hadn't gone into any of the other apartments, and we know that most of the neighbors also don't lock their doors at night, so it sounds as if they walked up 3 flights of stairs, ignored the other apartments with the sole intention of coming to ours. And given the stealth, well, it's unlikely that they were intoxicated and that it was just a mistake. Nothing else really came out of it. The police said that they would keep an eye out, and I had to buy a new pair of headphones. But it left me thinking about what would have happened if I had opened my eyes and alerted this person standing over me. Would they have hurt me? Would it be a total stranger or someone whom I've already met? This story happened 3 years ago, around the time that COVID started, so it was a while back, but still worthy of a post. It was early 2020, and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it, and their commute to work was long, so they moved out and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace, around a 40-minute drive, and my sister pretty much rented it for free to me. I just paid for the water and also the electricity, and I looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 to 3 months and had already gotten used to it. One night, after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards my door, I noticed something really odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and I picked it up thinking that it might have been mine since I'm a smoker. But after looking at the brand name, I realized that it wasn't mine and I just threw it away. I didn't think much of it and just shrugged it off as some asshole throwing it at my curb. I went on with my night and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts, this time near my porch. And needless to say, I was pissed off and thought that someone sat on my porch and smoked. But since I didn't know who it was, there was really nothing that I could do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night, I was watching a movie on my laptop, and it was pretty late, past 1 a.m. I think. So, I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood, and it was COVID, so people rarely ventured out at night, but I didn't think much of it. Around half an hour later, I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about as their voice seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. And as I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my front door and I waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob being shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to my window to see if they had walked away or maybe just changed their mind. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you can move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and then I lifted it up. I moved the curtains and I was taken aback. Leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically stuttered over his own steps as he jumped back and he tightened his hoodie to cover his face. So all I could really see was his big blue eyes looking at me. His friend finally realized what was going on and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while, I was staring at them frozen in fear and trying to comprehend the situation that I was in. But I snapped out of it and I slammed the bars over my window, locking them and running up the stairs to the storage room where I pushed the table up to the door and then called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows being shaken aggressively. When they realized that they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. And by the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't too keen on staying there, so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. I'm still pretty jarred from this experience, but I figured that it would be easier to share about it than keep dwelling on it. A couple days ago, someone broke into my house while I was asleep. I work night shift, so sleeping during the day is something you learn to get used to. At around 6:30 p.m., I heard what I thought was a loud knocking sound coming from outside, and my dogs were going absolutely ballistic. For reference, I live on a farm out in the middle of nowhere, and my closest neighbor is half a mile away. But back to the story. I somewhat wake up, but don't really think anything of it since my neighbors like to shoot their guns, and this was during hunting season. As I start falling back asleep, my heart started fluttering weird, like I knew that something wasn't right. That's when I heard loud footsteps throughout the house. The dogs are still barking, but then they start to quiet down. That's when I really begin to worry. When I think my dogs would protect me in a time like this, well, fat chance. The footsteps stop on the other side of my bedroom door, and it doesn't move. I then think, this is how I'm gonna die. And although I had a weapon in my room, I knew that I couldn't get to it without being heard. It felt like an eternity before the steps move around and then towards my brother's room. Rustling can be heard loudly through the house, and things were being thrown around. I knew that they were in my brother's room. Some of his friends are into seedy situations, and I knew that it had to be one of them. I heard the footsteps coming back to my door, and the doorknob handle moves. I immediately turn my back towards the door, and I close my eyes, and I put a hand over my mouth to stop it from screaming. The door opens, but that's it. Then he leaves as a car drives down the road. I finally bucked up my courage and I get out of bed. And as I check, everything in the house except for my brother's room was undisturbed. I immediately called my brother and I asked if any of his friends were coming over. He said not that he knew of, and I told him what had happened. He got off the phone with me to start calling around, and I went back to bed, and I noticed that I still had my window cracked open over from earlier, and I realized that I had my sheet off of me wearing only a t-shirt to bed. If it was who I think it was, this wasn't a random event. One of my brother's friends had always had his eyes for me, and the fact that he saw me sleeping and in just a t-shirt makes me freak out. Whether or not he took something out of my brother's room or knew that I was home alone sleeping before having to work later that night, I really don't know. I'll post an update when I hear from my brother. You move out to the country to get away from the activity of city life, and you let your guard down, and that's when something like this happens. Sometimes, country life isn't so safe after all. Update. Sorry for the late update. It's really been a crazy week, but thank you for bearing with me. My brother got back with me with the news that I absolutely dreaded hearing. None of his friends said or claimed to have been at the house at the time of the incident, so now I'm even more afraid of who was at my home and what their intentions were. They could have been scoping out my house during the day. I just hope that I don't have another visit like this anytime soon, but if there is a next time, I'll be sure to be ready for them. I live in a college town with 6 other young girls in our 20s. The city we live in is not that nice and has a huge homeless and drug problem where break-ins are not unusual. However, what happened last Saturday was definitely strange. My roommates and I, as well as some of our boyfriends, were hanging out and drinking in our house, while 2 of the girls opted to go out to a bar. By around 1 a.m., the 2 girls came home from the bar, and everyone was so tired that we all went to our respective rooms. Later in the night, I was awoken by someone opening my door and standing in my room, staring at me. In my head, I thought that it was one of my roommate's boyfriends, just trying to see if my boyfriend and I were still awake to continue the party. But since I was tired, I just pretended to be asleep to avoid being bugged. After a bit, the person closes my door and then proceeds to pace back and forth in the hallway. They then begin to attempt to open my roommate's door, whose room is right next to mine. Luckily, her door was locked and she also had her boyfriend with her. The person then proceeds to go into our utensils drawer and then grabs a knife to attempt to pick her lock. After gaining some courage, her boyfriend shouts, "Who the hell is that?" which startles the man, who then sprints up the stairs and out the door. The police were called and they did a search, and obviously they couldn't find anything. They told us that break-ins were normal, which we already knew. However, what makes this whole scenario creepier is that he didn't steal anything. My phone, alcohol, and $600 shoes were untouched. We also suspect that this person was not on drugs or alcohol, as he moved very quietly. He was able to get in because the 2 girls who came home from the bar did not lock the door behind them. I'm not sure what this man's intent was, but I am forever grateful that I happened to have my boyfriend with me at that time, which is not really often as he lives 3 hours away from me. It gives me chills thinking that a strange man was in my room, and what could have happened to me if I was alone. Back when I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time at my aunt and uncle's house, mostly because my cousin Martin was literally my best friend. So, pretty much any time that we didn't have school the next day, I would ask to stay the night with Martin. We would do the normal thing that 10-year-old boys would do: watch movies, play the PlayStation, eat junk food, drink too much soda, and then crash hard around midnight. It was honestly the highlight of my childhood, and I dearly miss those days, mostly because it was a simpler time. And now, I have a 2-year-old that likes to keep me up all night because he doesn't want to sleep. That's neither here nor there though. I remember that this happened one weekend in October, probably about a week before Halloween, and mostly because Marty and I had made a pact to stay up as late as we could watching scary movies. We were 10, and Halloween was the freakiest thing that I have ever seen in my entire life. Should we have been watching those kinds of movies at that age? Probably not, but we still did. So, about 3 hours into our creepy movie marathon, I remember that I had to get up to go to the bathroom, and Marty was half passed out on the couch. I got up, went down the hall to the bathroom, and then I went to do my business. And while I was going, I started hearing what sounded like a tapping on the window. When I was finished with what I was doing, I stepped over to the window and I lifted the blind to look out into the yard to see if there was someone out there. From what I could see, there wasn't anyone there. The backyard was empty. I was a little bit confused, but I was also getting tired, so I just kind of let it go. As I was walking down the hallway and back to the living room, I started hearing that same sound, the tapping sound. This time, it was coming from the kitchen, specifically the back door. It honestly sounded like someone tapping their fingernails on the glass in a quick succession, something like a quick rhythm. I was a bit scared, but more than that, I was annoyed. Who the hell was in their backyard, and why were they tapping on the back door? I pulled the curtain open on the back door and I looked out again and still nothing. This time though, I opened the door and I stepped out onto the back deck to see if I could see someone or something there, but there still wasn't anyone there. As I was staring out at the backyard, I heard Marty yell for me and ask where I was. I quickly ran back in and I shut the door behind me. When I got back to the living room, Marty asked me what I was doing, and I told him that I kept hearing something tapping on the window, so I went out back to check for it. He laughed slightly and then told me to stop trying to scare him. I told him that I wasn't trying to scare him and that I was being serious. He just shrugged me off and then said that he was going back to sleep. I decided that I should go ahead and go to sleep as well, so I pulled up my sleeping bag and then turned off the TV. I started to doze off pretty quickly, but no sooner than when I actually started to fall asleep, I started hearing what sounded like footsteps on the kitchen linoleum. I opened my eyes, but the room was dark, and I was freaking out in my head. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake Marty up and tell him to go get his dad, but they were upstairs, and he was passed out on the couch across the room. I just lay there, and I kept my eyes on the door that led into the hallway, waiting to see some kind of axe murderer or something of that sort. But what I saw wasn't an axe murderer, but it was just as terrifying. After a few moments of staring and also waiting, I saw what looked like a man dressed in all black. I strained my eyes, trying to make out a face, but I think he was wearing a balaclava, because I just remember not being able to tell what he looked like at all. I watched as he walked into the room and then looked around, walking past where I was lying in my sleeping bag. It took my tired mind a few minutes to process that. If I could see him, then it was highly likely that he could also see me. I remember just shutting my eyes as tightly as I could and telling myself that it was a dream and that it would be over soon. I just tried to believe that over and over and over again. I guess after a few minutes, I must have forced myself to sleep, because the next thing that I remember is waking up to the sunlight coming through the window as the sun was just coming up. At that point, I realized that the whole thing must have been just a dream, and that I was just freaking myself out after having watched a bunch of scary movies. Being morning, I had to pee again, so I undid my sleeping bag and I got up to go toward the bathroom. From the hallway, on the way to the bathroom, you could actually see the kitchen. A part of me was saying that I needed to go check. I don't know what was telling me this. It may have been my curious mind telling me that I wanted to know if it was really a dream, but I felt like I needed to go check. And to my surprise, and also my horror, it wasn't a dream. When I got to the kitchen, I saw the back door wide open and muddy shoe prints going from the back door into the kitchen, then into the hallway. It was then that I noticed the prints on the carpet that led into the back living room where Marty and I were sleeping. I freaked out and I ran to wake up Marty, who then went and got his dad and told him about what had happened. So, to explain the whole situation and what exactly went down, this was partially my fault. The tapping sound I heard? Well, it was the guy trying to pry off the screen to one of the windows on the rear side of the house. When I went to look out the bathroom window, this guy was actually just out of my field of view. Then, when I heard it again, and I went to the back door to look out and see what was going on, I, with the attention span of a 10-year-old boy, forgot to lock the back door because Marty called for me. Then when I went back to the living room to go to sleep, and this guy had apparently realized that the back door was unlocked, he took full advantage of it. In the end, he stole the PlayStation, my aunt's CD collection, and a few other small things that they owned that were easy to get a hold of. That is probably the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me, both in my adult life and my childhood. And it's even worse that it was pretty much my fault that it happened like it did. Sure, this guy would have eventually gotten into one of the windows with enough effort on his end, but it's possible that he may have moved on to a different mark when this house proved to be too annoying. It really scares me that this intruder was in the same room as us, and that he could have easily killed us or abducted us if he really wanted to. I'm strangely thankful that he was just looking to rob them. The overall lesson with this story is when you go to bed, make sure all of your doors and windows are locked. Then, when you've made sure that they're all locked, go back and make sure that they're locked the second time, just to be absolutely sure. This story takes place in the Balearic Islands of Spain circa 2007. As every late August, my mom, grandma, aunt, and I would book a trip to Mallorca. We're all from northern Spain, but love the sun just as much as the Brits do. Well, anyway, our room overlooked the sea, and it was located on the first floor. I had just turned 8 years old, and every night for a week, we would enjoy the nightlife from our terrace. It was our 5th night in, And since there would be different booths at night where you could get tattoos, personalized jewelry, and etc., just underneath the terrace, we would just sit and watch people get stuff done, like their hair, tattoos, and etc. There was this guy getting a tattoo, and he was sitting in a weird position, so we can't really see what's going on with his girlfriend. My mom notices that some random guy starts groping her. She's obviously uncomfortable, and her boyfriend doesn't know what's going on at all. He's completely oblivious, and my mom doesn't know any English besides the very basic words, so she starts shouting, "Hey, stop!" Mallorca is filled with foreign tourists, and they all look foreign to us, so that's why she started shouting in English. The guy notices and stops groping her, but then gives us a deathly stare. He then starts again, and we're all shouting stop from our terrace. People start to notice that there's something wrong, and he keeps looking at us in a weird way. He then freaks out and then tries to get in our hotel. Thankfully enough, he couldn't get in because you needed a code in order to do that. However, 2 German girls were about to use that same door to get out, so we started to shout, "No! No!" And this dude kept leaving and coming back to see if he could come up with a way to get in. We didn't know what his intentions were, but we were all pretty shaken. We went to the front desk and eventually called the police to let them know that there was a man who was desperately trying to get inside our room. All I remember is crying and also thinking that I was going to get kidnapped or something. So asshole, let's not meet ever again. This started about 6 months ago. I was getting ready for bed in my room. It was maybe 10:30 p.m. and my curtains were closed, so I couldn't see out the window. But I heard 3 hard knocks on the glass of my window. Of course, that scared the living shit out of me. So I didn't even look, and I ran and got my dad, and then I made him look. Now, I live with my parents and 2 brothers in a fairly busy neighborhood, so noises weren't uncommon to hear. But this knock was directly on my window, so someone wanted me to hear it. The thing was, my bedroom isn't facing the front of the house or the road or anything. My room's actually towards the back of the house, so someone would have had to walk to the backyard in order to knock on my window, which seemed very odd. So I had my dad check, but when he opened the curtains, no one was outside the window. He even went into the backyard to check, and no one was there. That was the first incident. I closed my curtains, and I brushed it off as me hearing things, or some sort of animal. The following night, at almost the exact same time, I heard another 3 knocks on my window. Immediately, I went and I got my dad again for him to just see nothing all over again. But this time, I didn't brush it off and I slept in my parents' room on the floor. The next few nights, there was nothing until about a week later. I was home alone and it was about 8:30 to 9 p.m. and I was on FaceTime with my friend when I heard another 3 knocks on my window. This time, I was home alone, so I couldn't go get my dad, but I ran into the room and I called them. They told me to call the neighbors to check because they were out of town, and so I did just that, and the neighbors saw nothing. The night after that, it was about 1 a.m. I think, when I heard the knocking again. It wasn't 3 times though, it was more, and it woke me out of a dead sleep. I was tempted to just look out the window to see who this was, but part of me didn't want to know. I just went and I got my parents, who didn't bother to check at this point because they didn't see anything the last few times. I kept hearing the knocking for the next few nights after, to the point where I ended up just sleeping on the couch. My parents decided to just let me move bedrooms, and so they moved my bedroom into what was the office, and then they switched everything around, so hopefully that I wouldn't hear any more things. After moving bedrooms, I didn't hear anything. It was good for maybe 3 nights, but then I heard it again, the same knocking 3 hard times. This time, I looked out the window. I saw what I assumed was a man or a very big-built woman crouching down, wearing a gray hoodie and some dark jeans that I can't recall the color. It was dark, maybe gray or maybe black. I then closed the curtains, went and got my parents and told them all about it, and they informed the police. The police really couldn't do anything because we had no solid proof beside my words. They advised that we get a camera facing my bedroom and around that area of the house, so that's what we did. I haven't heard the knocking since, but I do wonder who it was, and nonetheless, it makes a good story to tell. I was living in Fiji Islands back in 2016, and I was 14 years old. The story happened to my family, but mainly my mom lived it. It was on the 31st of October, and I was at my school for a Halloween-based party, and my parents and my little sister were gone to a family friend's Halloween party. So, the house was empty. My party finished at 9 p.m. and my dad came to pick me up, but dropped off my mom and my sister at the house because our security alarm was ringing. Because nobody was home, my family obviously called the security company over, and they sent a van with 3 security guards. My mom then opens the house and lets everyone in, and they check the whole house and they see no one. My mother checks all the cupboards, and under the bed with my little sister, who was only 12 at that time. The security go outside in the garden and also in the basement to check if there is anyone there, because it's not an accidental ring. We don't have any pets in the house. My mom then turns on all the lights from the living room and also the balcony. She starts to open the window and the gates that protect all the windows to get on the balcony. But when she looks at the keyhole to put it in, she notices flip-flops on the floor. She then looks closer, and she sees 2 pairs of legs hiding really close to each other against the wall under a garden sofa. My mom yells out of her lungs, and the 2 guys got scared and jumped off the balcony into my garden. One of the guys grabbed the guy, but the second intruder jumps on the guard, and they run away jumping over the fence and then running into the forest. My mother regrets yelling, because if she came down and talked to the security quietly, then the guys wouldn't have ran out and probably been caught. My mother is crying and holding my sister to her side and telling her that everything will be okay. The security then called the police, and they did a report describing the guys and started a search. The cops were here in a minute since I lived 100 meters from the closest police station. The guys who jumped lost a hat, their flip-flops, and they also left socks to use as somewhat gloves, and they also left 2 knives. Sadly, the guys were never found again. But 2 weeks later, my mom pulls out of the driveway and she looks into the rear mirror of her car and sees 90% sure the 2 guys there opposite of our house staring at her. The short one had the same new hat and the other guy had a brand new flip-flops. when my mom drove away to the police station, the guys were gone and never to be found again. I got home after with my dad to my mom and my sister crying. My dad was mad that he didn't stay, but my mom had drank and could not drive. Luckily, my mom saw them before she opened the window. Otherwise, we never know what could have happened. Now, how did the two guys get on the balcony? Well, it's going to sound stupid, but right next to the balcony where they were hiding, there are two wooden poles linked with a weird plank. It's not to hang any clothes or whatsoever, but they're just there. My dad asked the landlord to get rid of it, but the landlord did not want to. And to give more idea about this pole thing, me at 15 or 16, when I was already 6 foot, I could jump and climb onto my balcony because I did it to sneak out of the house to go see my girlfriend. I am now 21 and I live in Australia, and even though I did not live this for myself, it really scared me because I was young. And now that I live alone, I check the entirety of my house and make sure that my house is always locked to the point that I lock myself out of my house way too many times. And being a fan of this kind of stories, my parents and my sister moved on, but me. This happened about 3 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time, and it still creeps me out. I'm male and I'm 21, and I had just moved into a new apartment on the first floor of a building. It was late one night, and my roommate was out when somebody knocked on the door. This was not uncommon, as we were in a college, and my roommate had friends that would come by to hang out at all hours of the day. So I just figured that it was one of his friends, so I get up and I check the peephole. Staring right back at me through the peephole is an eyeball pressed against it. Again, this is also something that one of our friends might do, just to be funny, you know. I chuckled and I opened the door. Surprised, I see a guy in his mid-20s that I didn't recognize. He was strange to say the least. He was very hyper and immediately launched into a door-to-door salesman type pitch. I can't remember exactly what he was even selling, but it was something about the local university. The whole time he was talking, he kept looking past me into the apartment, and he was fidgeting and even standing on his tiptoes to see inside. Still, I just thought the guy was weird and nervous and might not have been all there. I politely declined to buy anything from him, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. I finally had to be pretty stern in telling him that I wasn't interested at all. He finally accepted defeat, and as I was closing the door, he put his hand out and then stopped the door from closing. Before I can be like, "What the fuck, dude?" he smiles at me and says, "I like Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64 too." Now, me and my roommate had been staying up late into the night playing Mario Kart 64 in my bedroom for the past several days before that. But there was nothing that he could see from the apartment entrance that had anything to do with Mario Kart. So I was taken aback and trying to add things up in my head and confusingly asked him, "How do you know I play Mario Kart?" He then got super nervous and then said, Oh, I just thought that anyone with a couch like that would be into Mario Kart or the Nintendo 64, cause you know, it's like the retro game and that's a retro couch. What the hell even is that explanation? And then he was like, "Okay, bye," and literally scurried away. I then shut the door and locked it, and I start trying to put the pieces together on how he could have known that, because obviously, it wasn't because of my grandma's old couch. Remember, it's a first-floor apartment that backed up to the woods. My roommate got home shortly after that, and I immediately tell him about the encounter. He was freaked out too, and so we started investigating. At first, it seemed as if there was no way to even see inside my bedroom. My blinds were always down, so we went outside and tested it, and found that the only way to see inside would have been if you had your face right up against the window, and even then, you kind of had to crouch and close one eye just to get a glimpse of the inside. A couple more creepy details was that my window was over a balcony, and the Nintendo 64 console itself was stored inside of the TV stand and was really not visible. You'd only be able to see it while we were actively playing, which we never did until we were a little stoned and it was like 2 a.m. So basically, this creep had been jumping the railing to our balcony, pressing his face against my window, and watching us play Mario Kart in the middle of the night. I never saw that guy again, but needless to say, I was pretty paranoid for a while after that. I constantly checked my windows, and I woke up in the middle of the night paranoid that he was standing just a couple of feet away, watching me sleep. It was just a very unsettling encounter, and I'm glad that nothing more ever came out of it, and that I never saw him again. But I have always wondered what his motives were. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.